Let's get the rest of the week's top stories now. Joining me is Washington correspondent for the Australian newspaper, Adam Creighton. Adam, thank you so much for joining us on the U.S. Report. A lot of news to cover here. Absolutely fascinated by this story about three former intelligence officials who publicly and falsely tried to discredit the Hunter Biden laptop. They have been given a new gig by the Biden administration as national security consultants. Adam, I thought this was beyond a joke. You've got John Brennan, James Clapper, and Paul Colby all being on this Department of Homeland Security committee. This is as swampy as it gets.
Yeah, look, I think that's right. It certainly has a jobs for the boys feel to it, I must say. And, you know, they've been embarrassed, massively embarrassed, along with the other 48 so-called intelligence experts who wrote that infamous letter in 2020 saying the Hunter Biden laptop story was wrong. And of course, it was completely authentic. I mean, it's a reminder that if the establishment agrees with you and you're wrong, you can still succeed, you can still thrive, you can fail up. So I think this is a good example of that. But the broader point is, 22 years on from September 11, roughly, is, why does the US national security state need even more advisors, even more staff? I mean, what is the threat here? I mean, it's just the relentless growth of this vast bureaucracy. I think that's the disappointing point too.
Well, not only the vast growth of that bureaucracy, but if you think about it too, they call it this Homeland Security Advisory Group. They're giving gigs on this to people who clearly know what side of the bread their bread is buttered on here. What actual benefit to real national security does this have to have people who are politicized in there? It would seem to me that the threat that you would miss a real danger would be greater when you have this kind of politicized committee.
Yeah, look, I think it's a very good point. And for half the population at least, or at least a minority of the US voting public, it's going to raise all those questions that you just said, of a partisan, biased Homeland Security Department, which is overly concerned with so-called domestic terrorism, which in many cases, as you know, has been concerned American parents interested in the curriculum of their school. And the president constantly goes on about, the great danger of white nationalism in the US with extremely little empirical backing to that point. And so I think all those narratives come together in this.
Now, I want to move on, Adam, to another story here, which absolutely, I think, is so critical as we get into the next election cycle. In Pennsylvania, the governor has just announced that when you go to get a driver's license in Pennsylvania, you're going to be automatically put on the voter rolls. That means anybody can get a driver's license and they get automatically registered to vote. Now, Adam, I think you've got a driver's license. I don't think you're a U.S. citizen, but under this system, if you lived in Pennsylvania, you'd be registered to vote.
Well, look, I mean, I think it's, on the face of it, the reform is fair enough, I suppose. I mean, I think Republicans worry that Democrats are only doing this because it might marginally increase the Democrat vote for some reason, for whatever reason. But, the states in America, in terms of voting, they have all their own rules, as you know. They run their own voting show. And it's a shame it's not consistent like Australia, because every election cycle, it leads to all these arguments about biased outcomes. But actually, if you look at some recent research, which has just come out, I think from the University of Chicago, a few economists there, they looked at the differences that these small changes in voting rules have. And the answer is very little. So, I mean, even if you have a state like Mississippi with extremely strict rules, where you have to have voter ID, photo ID, it doesn't actually make much difference at the end of the day to the turnout and the outcome.
Interesting. Okay, a bit of reassurance there. But, you got to say, Adam, you're missing a great debate over ticks and crosses and the AEC with the coming referendum in Australia. But that's a whole other story for another show. Let's move up to Capitol Hill right now, where House Republicans are inching closer to overcoming their deep internal divisions to advance some stalled spending legislation, preventing a government shutdown. I've seen so many government shutdowns in my life ever since Newt Gingrich.
Oh, no.
What's the prospect of this one? How much of this is just, this game of chicken that you wind up seeing played not just between Republicans and Democrats, but also within the Republican Party itself?
Yeah, well, look, as you say, there have been so many shutdowns. I think 14 in the US, ranging between 1 day and 35 days since the early 1980s. So this is a relatively common thing. It's brinkmanship. It's part of the political process here. I mean, they have until the 1st of October to pass, I think, something like 12 bills to fund the government. And they haven't passed any of them so far. Look, they still have another week and a bit. They'll probably pass them. I mean, it might be a small shutdown. I mean, it all comes down to politics, of course. I mean, when the federal government shuts down, it doesn't really affect the day-to-day lives of many Americans. And so I think both sides know that there can be a small shutdown for some days and no one really cares. It's just a matter of how long it goes on for, and of course, who gets blamed is the big question. I mean, that's what both parties want to know, is who is going to be blamed for a shutdown, Democrats or the Republicans?
Well, it seems historically, Adam, Republicans always wind up copping the blame for this because I think the media loves to advance
exactly
that sort of narrative here. Oh, the evil Republicans shutting down your benevolent, loving government. But
on the spending. But just on the spending point, I mean, they have a point, this small group of Republicans. I mean, the US fiscal situation is a really bad situation. I mean, the deficit has doubled and there's low unemployment. So it should be a good fiscal situation, not a huge deficit in these conditions. So, there's a serious problem here that does have to be dealt with. And the Democrats seemingly just want to keep kicking it down the road.
Well, Adam, I mean, as an economist yourself, tell us about that deficit. It's, I think, $33 trillion or something I heard the other day, some insane figure. At some point, I mean, is there a real danger to the U.S. economy that the bottom falls out of all of that?
Yeah, look, don't hold me to the figures, but something like in the last 6 months, the total debt has gone up by $1.5 trillion, which is far ahead of expectations. It's well above 33 trillion. I mean, it's heading for 100% of GDP, and of course, it's not wartime yet. This is peacetime. The economy is supposedly strong, and you've got this fiscal situation. So, I mean, at some point, the music is going to stop, and you really don't want to be the president that is in office when that happens. I think there's going to be a fiscal reckoning. I mean, rates are obviously much higher, so the interest burden of this massive debt is far greater for the US government going forward. But seemingly for the next 6 to 18 months, I think both sides really are hoping that nothing bad happens, so they can both ignore it.
Wow, well, that sounds like some pretty responsible politicking there by both sides here. Adam, before I let you go, welcome to America. Yeah, sure. A bipartisan, well, I see this question here touches with Australia, too, because right now there's a bunch of Australian politicians from both sides of the aisle who have gone to the U.S. to demand the U.S. drop its attempt to extradite WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Now, I've spoken to people on both sides of the aisle here. Senator Alex Antic from the right is over there. Tell us about this. What are the prospects that they have for any success on that?
Well, look, I mean, you'd probably say the prospects are small, but as Barnaby Joyce said to me recently, look, the mere fact, and he's also part of the delegation, the mere fact that the Justice Department is actually listening to them says that they may be considering some change in the future. The US is very determined to get Assange, to make an example of him. They've been pursuing him for many years. But I think if anything is going to happen, it's probably going to happen in late October when the Prime Minister is here, Anthony Albanese, and Joe Biden graciously says that the US is going to change its attitude to Assange. And that would be a huge political win for Albo, let's face it. It would be massive. But it may not happen. I mean, I still think that the odds are it won't happen, but I think if there is any change, that's when it's going to happen, at that state dinner.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I don't think anything's going to happen. But anyway, be interesting to watch. Adam Creighton, thank you so much.
Thanks, James. No worries.